Hello, everyone. Welcome to the USAID Asia Counter Trafficking in Person Summit from Evidence to Action, hosted by Winrock International. My name is Hermes, and I will be your technical facilitator today to ensure that you have a smooth experience with Zoom. You are at the session titled Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Strategy. We will begin in just a moment here, but before we get started, we want to cover a few technical features available to you today. Today, we're using Zoom meetings to enable as much interactivity as possible. Your participation via chat is highly encouraged, and our team will work to acknowledge and address as many comments and questions as we can throughout today's session. To help us acknowledge you and your questions and inputs, please rename yourself to your name and organization by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your Zoom window, hovering your mouse over your name, clicking More, and then clicking Rename. The meeting will be recorded today. Please keep your camera off unless you are invited to speak in order to help everyone have a smooth connection. Continue the conversation in the conference community on MS Teams and spark further conversations on social media using the hashtags WinrockE2A and hashtag Evidence to Action. Once again, you're at the session titled Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Strategy. We're now ready to get started, so I'm going to hand over the floor to Dina Skippa, Senior Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor at Winrock International. Dina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hermes, so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us from around the world. We are so excited to be talking about the implications of gender equality and social inclusion in counter trafficking in programming. And we're here with two incredible practitioners. Would love for the both of them to just introduce themselves. Veronica and Hui.
Thanks, Dina. My name is Veronica Gregg. I'm a gender and social inclusion expert. I have 17 years working in the field in various sectors. Since 2009, I've also been working as a technical advisor on CTIP programs with governments and NGOs throughout Asia. During this time, I've designed, implemented, and evaluated a number of different trafficking initiatives. And in particular, I've had a long involvement working on the Australian government trafficking programs. At the moment, I'm also contributing to the development of the new Australian strategy on international human trafficking and modern slavery. And most recently, I also was the lead author on the Winrock USAID Gender and Social Inclusion Toolkit that we'll be talking about today. Thanks a lot, Dina.
Thank you, Veronica, so much. And Hui, would you love to introduce yourself? Great.
Thanks, Dina, and hello, everybody, and welcome to the session. My name is Kusalin Wongnamkop, or you can call me Yui for short. I am a Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Specialist for the USAID Thailand CTIP project. And before joining Winrock, I had experience working with parliamentarians in Asia and the Pacific regions on policy advocacy, supporting gender equality and women's empowerment. And also with Winrock, we've been working under Thailand CTIP on Jessie mainstreaming into the program. And then I'm very excited to discuss about the new tools that we are having today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Hui. And again, to all of you, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your interest. My name is Dina Skippa, and I am the Senior Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor at Winrock International, and have the pleasure and privilege to work with incredible practitioners across the organization, but specifically within our team of practitioners who are working on safe migration and counter-trafficking programming. I had the opportunity and privilege to work with Veronica on this toolkit indirectly, and it was an incredible experience. And I think, Veronica, you can agree that despite there being so many practical resources available, it's oftentimes rather difficult to identify concrete strategies and approaches that really apply in the CTIP context, in the safe migration context. And what I really found incredible about this opportunity was to really dig deep into some tangible examples, to offer practitioners some real life case studies of where Jessie can be meaningfully applied. So with that, I thought we could jump into our conversation, just exploring these dimensions. So maybe we could kick it off just by starting off with Froniga. If you could tell us a little bit about what your experience has been. You talked about your experience prior in Jessie and CTIP programming, but would love to know sort of the peaks and valleys, if you will. What has been particularly, maybe to start it off with, what has been particularly challenging when it comes to addressing Jessie and broadly, but also specifically in CTIP programming?
Thanks, Dina. I think that working on Jessie has gotten easier over the years because, especially in CTIP, it's widely accepted as being a key issue that needs to be addressed. The biggest challenge, though, is that it is a huge area and there's so much to do. So as everyone who works in the area knows, you know, it's not only cross-cultural, but it's also cross-sectoral. So, you know, you need to know something about justice or social work, economic implications, labor, education, communication. So it's really broad. It also impacts a lot of different groups. And for a long time, we focused just on women and girls and children more generally. And we didn't appreciate the unique issues facing men and boys, but also the different forms of trafficking. And as we're all seeing, there are new forms emerging every day. So I think for me, the biggest challenge has been trying to find the entry point where you're most likely to have an impact and where equality and inclusion can actually occur.
Absolutely. Great. Hui, did you want to add what your experience has been in terms of the challenges, if we can start there?
Yeah, sure. Because yeah, I'll add to the point of working with the practitioner on the ground, especially people who work closely with our at-risk populations who are migrants. They have a lot of awareness about how important Jessie is in terms of working in anti-trafficking, but there's still lack of appropriate tools to be able to apply in the fields. And also the idea of intersectionalities of gender and other cross-cutting issues that we really have to dig deep and then discuss more and increase more awareness about that so that they can integrate these issues into their programming. So this is one of examples that we face. Yeah.
Well, you know, as Froniga and we were all talking about this discussion, we were obviously, we have an appreciation for both the challenges and the opportunities that exist as practitioners in being able to do this work. But we would actually love to hear from everyone who has joined us today. And we are about to start a poll to just sort of take a pulse check in the virtual room about how important you all think it is to integrate gender equality and social inclusion metrics, tools, or principles into counter-trafficking in persons programming. And the results are coming in now.
Oh, great.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a majority of people saying extremely important, which is encouraging. We've got some folks saying somewhat important, and other folks are saying a little important. Okay, very good. Maybe we can segue into the next question, because we're just trying to get a sense of how important and sort of where we recognize that there's a diversity of practitioners and folks in the room. So we wanted to get a sense. Curious, because Froniga and we were just talking about some of their challenges, and we're going to segue into the successes in a minute, but just curious what your success has been in terms of integrating Jessie metrics, tools, or principles. We were talking about with Froniga around the idea that there is somewhat of a dearth of resources that really help practitioners apply meaningful approaches. You know, there's a lot that's written, but sometimes not as useful. Would love to see those results coming in. Froniga and we, are you in agreement seeing the diversity of responses across the poll?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So about half of the room has had some moderate success, which is to be fair. I think it's totally expected. Some success, great success, and have not integrated Jessie into a C2 program. But what I think, even though there's almost 39% of folks who have not integrated Jessie into a C2 program, still with the previous question, there are a significant number of us in this room who do feel that it's important. So that's great. That's great. And maybe if we can end with the final polling question, because it's great to hear what folks are thinking in the room. And it's I can see in the chat that there's folks chiming in from all around the world. So we have a diversity of experiences here, which is great. And I think the final question, if I'm not mistaken. So no, actually, this is not a polling question. This is more a question in the chat. And Hermes, thank you so much. You've typed it into the chat. For those of you who have had success, please share in the chat if you can, feel comfortable sharing some of those best lessons for making your initiative successful, because we'll refer back to that in the latter part of the conversation. But we definitely want to hear from you and what your experience has been, so we can all learn from each other. So let's go back. Maybe we can start with this time. What has been your experience as a Jessie specialist on a C2 program in terms of having success in integrating these themes and considerations into programming? What has been the thing that even left you the most inspired?
Yeah, so we're actually working in C2 programming, as I can see, because I've started working in this field for a few years already, and under this C2 with Winrock, I've seen the strong engagement of different stakeholders and the willingness of the government sector as well, that supporting these issues of gender equality and social inclusions. And recently, we also conducted a study on the alternative model of shelters, and then we advocate for a better service provision from LGBT individuals in tip shelters. And then we got a very positive feedback from the government and the willingness of them in supporting of these activities to support the LGBT. And also in my past experience as well, not specifically in CT field, the inspiring moment was that I could be able to engage male parliamentarians as a champion to advocate for the issues on gender equality and push forward policies that affect women and girls in their countries. And the network extended, and this was very inspiring. And then we hope that this could be replicated and could be inspired in our CTIP community as well. Yeah.
Great. I love that you shared the experience of being able to engage with the government as a marker sort of that creating that enabling environment, if you will, and really
exactly.
Designing solutions that obviously could be taken forward beyond the life of the project. I also really loved how you shared about the experience of engaging with service provision to the LGBTQIA+ community, which is something that Veronica and we and I have all been talking about, has been a population group that is not always addressed in the context of programming. And I raised those two that you shared. Thank you so much. I love hearing about your experience. It's fantastic, because there's a comment in the chat where the question is, what are we defining as success? And that's a great question. I kind of just jumped in because Veronica and I have been talking about this for a couple of weeks. I would have to say that we're defining success in terms of addressing a critical gap in the area that we are working, that we've been able to see some degree of uptick in either service provision, reach, access, being able to address a critical need, to making sure that we are designing solutions for those that are most marginalized when it comes to safe migration and counter trafficking counter trafficking in persons. It's a bit of a broad answer, but I think success really hinges on what are the gaps in the context, and are we are we increasing or improving opportunities in the context of a given program? So if that's, as long as we're ensuring that, so Maya from Thailand actually shared, as long as we're ensuring that we're not re-traumatizing anyone in the process, following trauma-informed care and victim and survivor-centered approaches is critical. I couldn't agree more, absolutely. So feel free to add more of those examples of success. Hui, what do you think? How would you define success in this context?
I would say that at the beginning of the project, we did not really see what our direction would be in terms of our target activities around Jessie. But then after having analysis, after engaging more people on the ground and talking with different stakeholders, we were able to identify that, as you say, there's still gaps of the addressing needs of specific vulnerable groups, and that we have to move forward and take it on from there. So I think it's not a big success, but it's one of the steps that we have to take forward, and then
Right, and notice that we didn't talk about the degree of success, of it being a large success or a small success. I think you so beautifully said a point that I think is really critical in terms of defining success. And Sophie Zinzer is also actually mentioning it as well. If a project hasn't addressed or done the necessary mapping of who the stakeholders are, who the marginalized groups are, what's happening at different levels to be able to identify those gaps and really commit to a plan moving forward, it's kind of hard to determine if success is being made in a CTIP project, right? Veronica, would you like to add anything about how do we define success in terms of Jessie integration, what that might look like? It's a large question. I know you jumped right in.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and it deserves its own panel, if not summit. I think it depends. I mean, if you've got a strong monitoring and evaluation framework, then of course that's your go-to. And then if you're trying to assess something like capacity building, I guess you need to look at the various levels, the individual, institutional, program if you are part of a program and beyond. But I think for me, some of the wonderful little pieces of success have not been able to be kind of extrapolated, if you will, but are still very worthwhile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we can all appreciate that this work is definitely not easy at times. We say it's not a cakewalk, but I think if there's a group of committed individuals, and as we've mentioned, a commitment to the process and really conducting that mapping early on, and perhaps even having conversations of what programs think success should look like. I think that there's a process that can be followed to at least investigate, be curious a bit more about how the impacts of our interventions are reaching different social groups. And so, that's really the essence of this work. While we recognize that it's not easy, we know that it is completely valuable and worthwhile. And so, we want to kind of segue our conversation into resources. And just before we pull up the screen, I'm going to share my screen for everyone with the Jessie Toolkit that was developed for the Asia CTIP project, and an incredible resource for Jessie practitioners, but also CTIP practitioners across the board. Would you both agree, Veronica and Hui?
Yeah.
And as I'm pulling that up, perhaps you both could chime in on what your experience has been in finding resources. What has been your experience around practical resources that have been available for this sector?
Yeah, I'll jump in if you want.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so there are a lot of resources out there, which is fantastic. But what people are looking for, I think, are off-the-shelf resources, and those are few and far between. There's a shortage also of targeted resources, the kind of resources that CTIP practitioners need, because we do work with such diverse partners. And also I think that working on Jessie can sometimes be a bit intimidating and mystifying, especially for beginners. So that's why when we were developing the toolkit, we really wanted to keep those people in mind who are new to Jessie, but not necessarily new to CTIP. When I'm working on CTIP project, I often borrow resources from the security sector or from the wealth of resources on gender-based violence, and then I customize them for a CTIP audience or a CTIP program, but not everyone can do that. So I hope that the toolkit provides enough interesting resources for more experienced practitioners, but also doesn't forget those people who are new to the field.
Veronica, I love that you shared that. We've had conversations over the last couple of months about that very theme, about really making the context or this area of addressing Jessie into CTIP programming accessible, right? Digestible to folks. And a lot of times people can be a bit intimidated, as you mentioned. So what I love about this toolkit is that it's so easy to navigate and to really find what you're looking for. It can be read in its entirety if you have time and interest, or you can do a simple search to look if there are any resources available in this. I thought maybe we could kick it off just by, Veronica, if you could explain a little bit about what the design and development process looked like, how this toolkit came to be, in fact, how it was developed.
Okay, so the toolkit, the demand for the toolkit, if you will, came from the Winrock Asia CTIP project. And there was a need to address some of the gaps that we've been talking about. So we established a community of practice with 5 gender experts from Winrock. And then we conducted a needs assessment and used the findings from the needs assessment and what people are already doing in their day-to-day work as the launch point. So we didn't want another toolkit that's very dense on theory and policy. What we wanted was some way of improving what people are already doing, and also some tools, pardon me, some tools that can be used by people that may only do a gender activity one time and may not have it as their core business. So we gathered the resources and the examples. I think we'll see when we look at the toolkit that the examples are a really important module in the toolkit, because they've been gathered from all over the Asia region of things that people are already doing, which you might want to borrow for your own project or your own work. And then we worked with a designer, an excellent designer at Winrock, to make it a very interactive, user-friendly toolkit.
Right. No, fantastic. And I loved how you've blended in your response, you know, how this was developed, but also why it was developed. And, you know, really understanding that. I think it's important to note that this toolkit is by no means an attempt to replace existing donor and organizational policies and processes on Jessie. Really, it serves as a complement. And it's a searchable PDF. It's a clickable PDF, which is great. And we thought that we would do a little bit of a virtual test drive with all of you. Hopefully you'll appreciate that. Hermes, I think I've asked for your support. If you can copy the link to the toolkit in the chat, hopefully that can be done so folks can have a link to that after to go digging through. And as you'll see, the toolkit is broken down into 4 different modules, which are all clickable. So a really broad understanding of, well, maybe Veronica, you're the author of this. I don't want to, do you want to talk through sort of the structure and the outline of the 4 modules?
Yeah. I don't have the screen.
Okay.
Not on the screen. I'll just give you a little bit more kind
No worries.
a little bit more of a background around our thinking when we were preparing these modules. So we really did want to advance the thinking around Jessie and CTIP and respond to some of those gaps that we talked about earlier. We wanted to look at, to go beyond just looking at women and girls. So we wanted to look at the diverse groups of at-risk, the at-risk groups, including, different groups of men, the LGBT community, and then also people facing multiple or intersecting forms of discrimination, such as women with a disability. But we also wanted to look at diverse groups of survivors. And I think that survivor piece was really important to bring in. And there's some great tools in the toolkit for those people who want to work closer with survivors. But we also didn't want to forget that a lot of us, as we've seen in the chat and even the people that are on the Zoom with us, is that there's also Jessie's issues within the organisations that we work in. And also some of our colleagues and even ourselves, we have attitudes or we come to work with some stereotypes which can actually impact the work that we do. So we have addressed those kind of tough issues in the toolkit as well. As you keep mentioning, we wanted it to be as practical as possible, something you can tap into or tap out of, something you do not have to read cover to cover, and something that broad stakeholders could use. So I think it's really exciting, but I can't see it on my screen.
That's okay. That's okay. What I can do, I'm sharing it from my end, and I just, if folks can see on the screen, hopefully, the outline of the Jessie Toolkit looks at really framing the discussion around understanding Jessie. And what I've loved from this conversation, Hui has mentioned it, Franega, you obviously are addressing it, is the importance of intersectionality. I think what's great about this toolkit is that it dives much deeper than any compendium of resources I've seen to really look much deeper at the intersections of identity and how people, survivors, are going to be impacted by safe migration and CTIP programming differently because of these intersecting identities. And just to kind of give a bit of a plug on how great the design features of this toolkit are, as you can all see, hopefully from your screen, there's embedded links, looking at videos and external resources. You can click here to watch a webinar on disability and trafficking in persons. So it's really engaging. It really goes much deeper in terms of just having to read dense text. And as you can see, it's clickable. If your project is looking at needing to conduct a Jessie analysis in your project, it's sort of an introduction to what a Jessie analysis can do. At a minimum, what should be achieved, some of these resources. And then my favorite part of the toolkit is examples of Jessie and CTIP in action. It really gives some actual case studies that we were able to collect from not only our Winrock CTIP portfolio, but also more broadly within the research. Maybe this would be a great opportunity to talk about some of the case studies that you were able to both contribute to the toolkit and ones that you've been particularly impressed by. Anything stick out for you about the example that you provided to the toolkit or provided?
Right. Well, yeah, just some examples also includes the what I mentioned, the service provision for LGBT, and also the example of engaging different partners like private sector companies that help to address Jessie issues in the workplace, including ethical recruitment, the policies around working with employees. So this toolkit is very, I think it's like one-stop shop for you, because, well, just now I trying to search private sector, and then it comes up a lot of case studies that we can find, not only from Thailand City, but other projects as well. And also some tools that we can use to engage private sectors too. So yeah, we can explore it and then, yeah.
I love that. I love that. You know, my personal example is up on the screen right now. My personal favorite is some examples that were included in the toolkit of addressing harmful stereotypes used in CTIP campaigns. And I loved the example that was highlighted around in Bangladesh of, you know, what types of campaigns and slogans could be designed to inherently address some of those embedded entrenched stereotypes that can be impacting survivors and that entire journey. Wanted to just also highlight really quick before we segue, this is a searchable PDF. So as we said, if you were looking for resources in the private sector, you can see that that's referenced 12 times, and look at where that's highlighted in resources. Okay, we've mentioned, you know, working with the LGBT community within this. We've got 38 references there, so you can look through the document that way. You can show our work with persons with disabilities. Highlighting here another one of my favorites in the toolkit, and I'll stop here because Froniga and we know I could talk about this for hours of how many nuggets of good information are embedded in this toolkit. But I loved how the team was able to integrate the importance of mental health issues and how that can impede reintegration efforts. Beautiful case study here talking about how this can actually impact men. And so I loved that was included. Just so many different layers that were referenced in the toolkit. Froniga, is there anything else that you would want to share as we're closing up this virtual test drive of the toolkit?
I'll just take my favorite. I really love the fact that we have actually included some troubleshooting tools. So if you're starting work with a new partner, we have a kind of checkup or a checklist that you can use to assess where they're coming from in terms of Jessie. I also love the fact that we have recognized how hard it is to work on Jessie for some practitioners in certain countries. So we include some kind of ways for those defenders, if you will, to protect themselves, and how to do no harm when working with survivors, but also looking after themselves and their staff members. So I think there is a lot in there, and yeah, it's fun to play with as you're doing.
Yes, yes. We don't want to, we would be remiss if we didn't include also the nod to monitoring, learning, and sharing, Jessie, in CTIP, which there's a lot of resources there. What I also love that's embedded in this toolkit is if you are a learner, if you love to learn more about things that you don't know, this is a great resource for that, because there are so many links to additional resources if you are looking for more information. And then also this phenomenal list of tools that are practical resources that can be used in the context of programming. So here you'll see on the right-hand side the list of different tools, things like how to identify entry points for working on Jessie in migration and in trafficking, what to consider when working with survivors of CTIP, how to conduct a do no harm risk assessment, one of my personal favorites, how to challenge discriminatory stereotypes and attitudes. So a lot of how-to resources, a lot of things that should be really helpful. And frankly, if you're not a Jessie specialist, I almost would suggest reading the first section, understanding Jessie, and then kind of digging through the tools just to familiarize yourself, because it's really practical, really some great opportunities. So I'll stop my screen share at this point, because as I mentioned, I could be talking about this toolkit for hours, and I've missed some of the comments. Any thoughts? I've seen, wow, this is really helpful in improving Jessie integration in our CTIP programs. Thanks for sharing the toolkit, of course. Any other comments or questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. We'd love to answer any of your questions. But for now, you know, it's a great opportunity to sort of close out this conversation piece, and then we'd love to hear from anyone if they have questions. Where do we go from here? Froniga, this was a labor of love for the past couple of months for you. Any ideas or conversations with the Asia CTIP program or any other practitioners that you've been working on about how this resource can be accessed? and utilize?
Thanks, Dina. So we have put it up on the WinRock website, and all of us are sharing it widely because I think we really do want to get it out there and get it used, because once we have that, we will actually be able to gather feedback and obtain the evidence we need to improve it. But really, it's about getting some rungs on the ladder, getting examples coming in. And we also had a conversation about having some kind of blog or something where people can post their experiences of using the toolkit and share the lessons, which would be great. And of course, down the track, that would go towards improving the toolkit if people had any issues with it. I'm also here to help. So, you know, if anyone starts using the toolkit and needs to troubleshoot, feel free to drop me an email or contact me on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think we just really need to see how useful it is for those who are actually in the field, especially during this time when most of us can't get to the field. And so we're really relying on our national counterparts to be the legs on the ground.
Thanks for mentioning that. I think there couldn't be a more important time to be dedicated to, you know, improving the body of work that's out there so that we can continue to disseminate resources, because we are severely limited with travel. So I think this is a perfect example of how we have really galvanized this moment, really looked to push things forward in spite of the limitations that we have at the moment. I would love to hear from your perspective on the toolkit. You know, now that it's completed, what are you thinking is next in terms of its application in your project or even amongst other practitioners?
Yes, I'm so excited about these toolkits because I earlier had this conversation with Veronica as well, and thanks for her help in putting all this together. Under Thailand CTIP also, we also plan to use this resource a lot, and also we'll share in our community also through the resource toolkits. And I myself also have to use it to train our partners and grantees, because there are of sections and modules that would be very useful for them. For example, how to do the monitoring, learning and evaluations, and also how to conduct a proper Jessie analysis, which Thailand CTIP is doing right now as well. And then these tools will be helping me to fill the gap of what I can identify as the Jessie priority issues in my program. Also, I'm excited to see the first modules that talk about to help the user to understand more about CTIP in Jessie in CTIP, because many times that we talk with governments and people outside of CTIP communities, maybe they do not have enough understanding about the context and how we apply Jessie in CTIP programming, and this is very helpful. So also we also plan to translate these toolkits into Thai language. So
yes, I see that's coming through the comments. It's so great to hear. That is
yes,
an incredible,
Megan.
yeah, Megan has mentioned that
we are translating.
And maybe this is an opportunity to consider perhaps down the line of translating into other languages.
Right.
I think, you know, you mentioning that this is a great starting point for facilitating conversations with different partners and different different partners and stakeholders, being able to really engage them in conversations. They likely, as we've talked about, are actors within the different phases of safe migration and counter trafficking efforts. How incredible would it be to have these resources translated into local languages, but also as a springboard for future conversations of how, while they might not be directly working on Jessie issues, their work is absolutely impacted by Jessie issues. So having that conversation with practitioners. There is a question from Sarah Seavey, who asked, how is this project sharing knowledge related to Jessie with other Winrock projects working on CTIP? I can actually answer that. While this is a CTIP toolkit, what is a fantastic opportunity is this resource is absolutely going to be a springboard for conversation across other Jessie specialists in our projects, as well as our Jessie working group at Winrock. I think this is a phenomenal example of a sector-specific resource that makes things super tangible, really accessible. And I think that there's a lot of learning that can be done even for Jessie specialists that are not working in counter trafficking. Because as Veronica mentioned, there's a lot of best practices and general principles related to Jessie that are embedded in this toolkit that I think that there's a lot that can be gleaned and learned in terms of conversation starters. So we have every intention at Winrock to really be pushing the needle. We are deepening our commitments at the very moment on gender equity and social inclusion, both organizationally and in our programming. And so this is a great way to end 2020 from my perspective, being able to deepen the resources available. So, well, we've kicked off some conversation in the chat. Folks are saying perhaps we can start translating it into Bangla for one of the projects, and maybe even in Khmer. This is fantastic. We'd love to see this resource, and I think that this is a great place to really start, combining resources, harnessing our collective. We'd love to kind of push it back to the audience now. We want to hear from you. When you think, as you've been listening to this conversation, we'd love to hear what some of your pain points have actually been. Are there things that you've been looking for, desperate to see, but can't find? Would love to hear from you in the chat, or if there are any specific types of resources or support that you are all looking for, or that we could answer a little bit more from the toolkit. And Hermes, if you could maybe, summarize that, thank you. And if there is anyone who wants to put a question, happy to. Great.
Dina, perhaps while we're waiting for people to get on that question, I can just touch on a couple of things. So a pain point for me often is when you have to do a training or a workshop on Jessie, and it's really just a once-off event, and you don't have the resources, or you have these very vague resources. So I think that there are things in the toolkit that can be pulled out and translated on an as-need basis. So you don't have to have a huge amount of resources to translate the entire document, but you can select a few tools and then use them in a training course or some other capacity building activity.
I love that you shared that. You know that you and I have talked about that as a pain point more broadly, where projects sometimes will not want to address the Jessie question because of the perception that there's a strain on resources, or that we can't possibly address it in the fullest extent that we may want it to. But if resources are a consideration, if they are a constraint, then there are ways to sort of hand select different elements of the toolkit, even to advance the conversation. We actually have a question from, I believe it's Hermes. Would you be able to invite someone?
Sophie's in, sir.
Great, fantastic.
Hi, Grace. Thank you so much. And thanks to all these panelists. This is a fascinating discussion. I am taking a look at the toolkit here, and I see there's only 3 mentions of technology, and I work on sort of developing tech-based solutions to TIP issues. And we always try to integrate gender into sort of the formation and design of the technology that we produce. But something that I guess gets to me about working on tech in this is that tech by default sort of reduces a lot of the social engagements and sort of the stereotyping in some ways that happens on the receiving end. Obviously, if it's designed without these great toolkit principles in mind, then it can perpetuate them. But when it is designed, even so, a lot of the anonymizing of humans makes these things kind of go away. So I'm wondering what specific approaches you guys have to integrating sort of these Jessie principles more deeply into tech-based solutions. Thank you all so much.
It's a great question. Sophie, thank you so much for bringing that forward to the conversation. I don't want to answer on behalf of Froniga or we, but would love to hear your perspectives and your opinions. I know that this is an area that wasn't exceptionally highlighted in the toolkit, but it's definitely an area that I think warrants further attention. Froniga, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. That was a great question. Even though you've searched and you've searched tech and haven't found a lot of references, I'm sure that you will find things that are relatable to what you were talking about, especially if you go back to that first chapter and look at some of the principles. You mentioned participation, but also I think inclusion and access is the big one for tech. There's also some other tools. I mean, I don't know specifically what your project is, but I'm sure, you know, you might want to consider working with champions, or even in the M&E chapter, there's some information about how to gather data from different groups, and then how, when conducting research, may also be relevant to tech, how to incorporate some gender, social inclusion issues in those research questions, and also how we share communications materials, making them accessible to different groups, particularly people with disabilities and people from other language groups. So, I mean, if you don't find what you're looking for, that's great news for us, because that means that there's further work that we can do, and certainly something to include next time round when we update it.
If I could just add something that just came to mind as well, not only beyond the gender dimension, but also looking at persons with disabilities and the technology question is also something that I think warrants further attention. And so definitely expanding, you know, I loved how Froniga mentioned the element of, you know, different, making technology available with different language groups, but also considering how people can access technology even with different disabilities would also be an area that could warrant further research. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, because that would be also very helpful for our project to make it this accessible to everyone and highlight these issues. And I have a point to add as well when we mentioned about things that maybe we cannot find in our tools, because I think I discussed and mentioned with you and Froniga earlier that somehow when we work in CTIP field, the issue is very broad and it covers like almost every social issues, and the issues that, for example, Thailand CTIP is working, it's also around, it's also sectoral focus in agriculture, constructions, and vulnerabilities in fishery industry. That is something that we can also explore on how to apply this principle in that. Yeah.
Great. We also, thank you, Lee. We have a question, which I love here, that was asked. Can the Jessie Toolkit be used in Africa too? I would say yes. Obviously, context is different from not only country to country, but even more further at that community level. Froniga and what would you say to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. There's I can't think off the top of my head if there's examples from Africa. I don't think there is, but there are certainly practices and approaches that can be used worldwide.
Yeah, there are some key principles. Yeah, key principles that we can consider. Yeah,
right.
I guess.
Now, the development of this toolkit was designed under the auspices of the Asia CTIP project. And so we brought together a community of practice of practitioners and Jessie specialists from our Asia CTIP programs. Winrock does have a CTIP program in Eastern Europe. Sorry, not Eastern, Central Asia. And we actually have, I saw that the chief of party is on this call, I believe, of that program. But we do not currently have any projects on counter trafficking in sub-Saharan Africa. So that is something that we are, we can't speak to directly from our programming portfolio, but obviously there are linkages and opportunities to learn from other programs in other continents, right? Great. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Great. Well, we have one more question for the virtual room. And Hermes, if I could ask for some support on this final polling question, we'd love to hear, because it sounds like from the room, from the different comments, that folks have been really appreciative, for the toolkit. And what we'd love to hear is, I know we did sort of a quick test drive of the toolkit, but really curious to know through a polling question, do you feel that you've been able to learn anything more, or are excited about being able to apply this in your program? Hermes, is it possible to bring up the question?
I've actually got a tech issue of my own, and it seems like I won't be able to pull up the poll, but I can go ahead and post that question into the chat and people can respond.
Yeah, and
sorry about that.
No worries. It totally happens. Thank you for letting us know. If you could answer in the chat, if you would like, if you feel that you've gained something from this conversation that you weren't really thinking about before, if you now feel a little bit more confident that there are resources out there that don't need to make it so complicated. Would love to hear from you, yes, and perhaps if you have the time to answer why, and we can share that in the group. And just while we're waiting for folks to chime in on the comments, Veronica, any other thoughts or closing words that you'd like to share? Great, that's coming in. Yes, definitely. Keen to dig in and excited about the practical applications. We are too. And we'd love to hear from you. I think that there are ways to keep this conversation going. I know I would love to hear from different practitioners about how this toolkit is being used in the field. I know Veronica would. Veronica, are you going to be available? I thought there was something that you had mentioned about being available for a LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm available anytime if people want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can be available. I think Hermes suggested that tomorrow I'd be available for tomorrow morning for an Ask Me Anything question and answer time. So you can reach me on LinkedIn.
Great.
Reading the chat, actually.
Yes. So just so everyone knows, Veronica can be accessed on LinkedIn, and she's going to be available for an Ask Me Anything. So if you have a chance to look through the toolkit and had a burning question that you wanted to ask, now's your chance. Veronica is the primary author of the toolkit. Obviously, she's worked with a number of Jessie experts, but hopefully can be able to answer any questions that you may have come up after this session. And I'm also sort of speaking and reading the comments as well. The word on my mind, Sophie says, is accessibility, ensuring that not only that we can access tools like the Jessie Toolkit, but those that are using our tech of various backgrounds. Great. Sarah, fantastic. Love that you're looking forward to reading it, looking forward to incorporating some of this into the training materials. Has the toolkit been field tested? The toolkit has just been released several weeks ago, right?
Yeah,
I'm losing track of time, forgive me, these days, but the tool has just been released. Yeah, Veronica.
Yeah, thanks, Dina, and thanks, Cam, for your question. The toolkit was just released, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it is currently being shared with the different stakeholders in the field. And as Yui mentioned, she's piloting some of the tools now. But when we developed the toolkit, the process that we took was we shortlisted the tools that were included in the toolkit based on their relevance and usability. So it's had many eyes, and we feel that what we have managed to distill into the toolkit itself is very usable. But we look forward to hearing from people's real life experiences.
And we also we're looking forward to hearing from Hui as she tests this with different partners. Hui, what are you thinking in terms of next steps of using this?
Yeah, so as I told the audience, we are translating it into Thai because we're going to test it and pilot it to train our grantees who work in the fields. There are some feedback from our technical dialogue that they require some materials, for example, on M&E. And some also need to know more about Jessie interrogations into C-tips in terms of using do no harm approach, for example. So then I'll select some of the modules and section that will be useful, and it's responding to their needs. And then we'll just pilot it, and then we'll just write you some feedback, Veronica, if there are something that we need to improve or to add, and if there are any comments. Yeah.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to Hui and to Froniga for taking the time to serve on this exciting panel. I have enjoyed every single moment of it. And I want to thank every single person who was able to come together because I see all of you as being champions in your own right of advancing the conversation around the importance of integrating Jessie, not only in CTIP programming, but broadly speaking. And thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment. And so feel free to reach out with any questions if you want to keep the conversation going, and feel free to reach out to Froniga tomorrow on that Ask Me Anything session. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for attending the Evidence to Action Summit in today's session. Please do join us at other sessions in the summit. All registered participants have received calendar invites and a participant's guide to all of the sessions. The next session will be Big Data, taking place in 5 minutes from now. So please go ahead and find the link on your participant guide or in your calendar, and we'll see you there. Please continue the conversation in the conference community on MS Teams, especially if you are interested in finding collaborators for the pitch competition being offered through participation in the Evidence to Action Summit. We'll get you more details on MS Teams as well about this time with Froniga, and please look there to continue the conversation. Thank you again for your participation, everyone, and have a wonderful day.